Hey, it's Alan, and I just wanted to let you know that you can now listen to the ongoing history of new music early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Everyone needs a hobby, something to distract us from the job and everyday life, something that's just for you, something that allows you to pursue a passion that maybe only you understand. For example, Flea is big into chess. When the Chili Peppers are on the road, he'll often challenge people to games, including grandmasters, who are invited backstage for the purpose of playing Flea. Geddy Lee of Rush used to be very, very big into signed baseballs, especially those from the old Negro League. Neil Young finds model trains very relaxing. Iggy Pop paints. Bob Dylan does sculpture. Bryan Adams is into photography. Slash collects pinball machines. Berriman of Coldplay has an incredible collection of cars, ranging from classic Porsches to a Bugatti Veyron. And then there's Stephen Morris of New Order. He collects old military vehicles, including tanks. Hey, listen, if you have the interest and the money, why not? This brings me to Kirk Hammett of Metallica. Kirk has always been a fan of horror movies, and Kirk is a fan of horror memorabilia. But his biggest passion are posters from old sci-fi and horror movies. His collection is so big and so comprehensive and so well preserved that it's the subject of exhibitions at major museums, including the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. But why these movie posters? Well, I sat down with Kirk to find out.
This is the Ongoing History of New Music podcast with Alan Cross.
Hello again, I'm Alan Cross, and this is a bonus podcast-only edition of the Ongoing History of New Music. Back in January 2019, I traveled to see Metallica play in Nashville, and before the show, I got to sit down with guitarist Kirk Hammett to talk about It's Alive, his exhibition of classic horror movie posters and artwork that was on its way to the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. Here's our conversation.
One of your absolute utter obsessions, which is old horror movie posters and memorabilia. Now, Lars has his paintings. James is getting into acting. What does Robert do?
He surfs and plays a lot of bass.
Okay. How did you get into something like this? Because your collection is one of the most comprehensive in the world, I understand.
Yes. Well, it was something that I've been into. Horror movies and the horror movie genre is something I've been into ever since I was a child, ever since I was like 5 or 6 years old. And it was something that I was attracted to initially because it was just so different and had a different sort of feel and atmosphere to a lot of the culture I was getting at the time. As a 5 or 6 year old, that would have entailed like a lot of like Disney movies and cartoons and
so this is the 60s, right?
This is like
the
late 60s, early 70s. And so when I saw my first horror movie, I thought, wow, this is a different type of movie, a different type of story. And I really, really latched onto it and kind of pursued more of that kind of story. And it was through comic books and magazines and movies and books and just anything that had that kind of like horror affiliation. I was attracted to, and it never really died out.
Do you remember that first horror movie?
Yeah, it was a movie called Day of the Triffids.
Oh, from 56.
I'm not sure what year it is. Probably late 50s or early 60s. Yeah.
So you're not just into any horror movies. It's got to be of a particular era, right?
Well, no, I'm into most horror movies. I enjoy movies from the turn of the last century up to recent time. I have to put boundaries on or limits on what I collect because I can easily collect a lot of other things that I don't collect. For instance, stuff like Star Wars, Star Trek, Planet of the Apes. A ton of science fiction stuff. But I try to keep it to what I really love and what means the most to me, which is the classic Universal horror monsters and those movies that came out in the early 30s. And they kind of...
Now that's really specific.
Yes. But, from there, the horror genre kind of exploded out and became what it initially became. during the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. I mean, it went through a lot of different phases and a lot of different themes that were in vogue and went out of vogue or out of fashion. But I like most horror movies. To answer your question, I like most horror movies, but I especially like the ones that have a sort of like supernatural theme, monster theme, a theme from outer space, a paranormal theme. I tend to shy away from horror movies that are overtly violent. I like gore, but I don't like gore for the sake of it.
So you're not a fan of like Saw or anything?
Well, those movies definitely have their place in the horror genre, but for me, I need more. I need more plot. I need more intrigue. To me, it's kind of a cheap thrill, just filming someone getting, violently abused or whatever. It needs to have a plot around it. The Saw movies do have a plot, but there are other movies out there that just violent for the sake of it.
Yeah, it's the torture porn.
Yeah, whatever you want to call it. And to me, I don't see, it's hard for me to recognize the artistry of it.
Okay, so let's go back to your collection. What are the boundaries that you put on it?
I like anything that is connected to those core group of movies or characters, which is Frankenstein, Dracula, The Mummy, Wolfman, Phantom of the Opera, Creature from the Black Lagoon, Hunchback of Notre Dame. I mean, those are like the key characters, and from those key characters, all these other movies have come out, and all these books and movie posters and merchandise and toys and whatnot. And it's very separate from like the Star Wars genre, where you have all these millions of action figures, or like, Planet of the Apes. Remember Planet of the Apes? It's still a big genre, and there's a lot of collectors who collect that stuff to this day.
I'm not a fan of the current stuff.
Yeah.
But if we go back to the Charlton Heston
era,
era,
and that's what I'm talking about. Because there's just a lot of that stuff that still survives, and it's enough to support its own like genre of collecting. And I stay away from that. Same with Star Trek. I mean, there's so much other stuff that I could collect, but I don't. And, I try to keep it to horror movie posters, props, which are, items that were used in certain movies. I love the toys. And, there's toys being made every day based on this stuff, and I love that. I love the masks. I love the artwork, paintings, comics, original art. Sculptures. There's a lot of stuff, but the collection that of things that are going to the Toronto Museum is my core collection, or in other words, my 100 best pieces.
How many pieces are there?
It's over 100, It's very representative of the horror genre in general, from the turn of last century up until modern times. And you can see the development of horror movie posters, and you can see all the different sort of trends that they went through. And you can actually see in the posters what was part of the culture of the day. I mean, for instance, the movie posters from the 30s are very vivid and have very lush, deep tones. And I look at them, I get a sense of like romance and whatnot. And that makes sense because back in the 30s, the most successful type of movie were romance movies, relationship movies. And so to reel in that audience those ticket buyers, the studios would design the horror movie posters so that they looked like romance movies.
You know what? Now that you mention it, I see that now.
Yeah. It's a very, very subtle thing. And so if you look at my book and you see all the posters from the 30s side by side, you will see that current theme. And and that's just the 30s. I mean, the 40s, the trend had changed again. into a very sort of stylized look, and then it changed again in the 50s and so on.
There, okay, so there's exactly what we're kind of talking about here.
Yeah, it's a very stylized look, and it was designed to appeal to whatever the moviegoer, whatever the culture was that the moviegoer was experiencing.
Again, Creature from the Black Lagoon. I mean, there's absolutely no reason to have a woman in a bathing suit
yeah.
as part of the poster.
The 50s were heavy on the women in either bathing suits or lingerie being chased by monsters. I mean, these creatures and aliens are so fortunate to be able to catch these women in such scantily clad attire and, tasteful as well.
Oh yeah. So this has become, wow, look at this. Okay, you'll see all this in the exhibition.
Yeah.
But now I'm never going to look at these posters the same way again.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a sign of just whatever the socio, economic, cultural thing was going on at the time. I mean, I hate to sound so like an anthropologist, but that is a fact. In a lot of these posters, I mean, they were designed to sort of reflect what was happening at that particular period of time.
Where do you find these things? Because I would imagine back in the day, the run finished. They tore it off the marquee.
That's exactly what happened. And to make matters worse, over the First World War and Second World War, there's these things called paper drives, which were basically big recycling efforts to get, all the paper that people weren't using, and to put it in big trucks and wagons and whatever, and haul it off to be recycled. And these recycling trucks would make it a point to stop in front of movie theaters and poster exchanges. And poster exchanges were these distribution centers where the theaters would send all the posters and they would distribute the posters to all the different theaters in the town or in the county. Well, these trucks would go in front of the poster exchanges and say, okay, you got some paper, I know, let's have it. And they'd bring out tons of movie posters, plop them on the truck, and off the truck would go and they'd get recycled. So as a result, there's very few examples of these posters that survive, and a lot of times they've survived because of flukes. A lot of them have been found in between walls used as insulation. A lot of them have been found outside the country in weird places like Sweden or New Zealand or Iran.
Iran?
Yeah, of all places. I mean, a major piece was found 3 years ago in Canada. It was found in a boarded up projection room that no one had opened up for the last 40 or 50 years.
The old theater that they were refurnishing.
I'm not sure if what the reason was for them to reopen that boarded up room, but as they came into the room, right on the wall was a Frankenstein 3 sheet, and that's. Up until that time, no one had ever seen one or knew one existed.
Well, how do you authenticate something like that?
Well, there are when these movies came out, there are these things called press books, and they had pictures of all the movie posters in the back, and so you had a direct sort of visual reference from the studio of what these posters looked like, even if they don't survive today. There's still a reference of what that poster did look like before it was abolished. And so you have that, and then also there are certain ways that you can test the paper. A certain sort of paper stock was used in the 30s, in the 20s and 30s. So I mean, that's the first thing to look for is a certain sort of paper stock. And then there are other ways. You add, you get the paper tested, and then there's a provenance as well. Where did this come from? Oh, it came from this theater, where all these other pieces came from, because there's a stack of movie posters found from the 20s, and this poster from 1928 came from that stack, from that find, and that's basically
so
how it all
it's
works.
like any other art collection.
Yeah, it's like hunting for gold. For me, it's been a lot of networking. I got into this hobby when it was so underground over 30 years ago. There weren't a lot of movie poster collectors. I mean, there were not a lot, not as many as there are today. So I was able to come in and take a look around and see what was available and grab what I wanted to grab, because no one else was grabbing it, no one else is collecting it, and I was able to get it at a price that was sensible. And nowadays, people realize that this stuff is so rare, and there's only, for certain posters, one example that exists in the entire world. And so collectors, when they hear about something that's that rare, there's a certain collector and a certain dealer who will collect that thing just because it's so rare. No matter what it is, coins, posters, books, cars, or whatever. And so you have a big influx of that kind of collector and that kind of dealer coming into this hobby. And of course, the supply is low, but it raises the demand, and prices go up. You have collectors or potential collectors learning about movie posters and how cool they are, and then they enter the collector world and trying to buy stuff, and then when they discover that there's only one piece here of this and two pieces there this, they'll do anything to get those pieces. And I've seen this every year for the last 35 years, and exponentially it's brought the entire horror genre of movie posters just way up in value and in price.
Now, is there, for you, a holy grail, understanding that there may be something out there that nobody knows exists?
Well, there's a lot of pieces out there that I would love to have that have not just been found at all. Like a Bride of Frankenstein 3-sheet, a Dracula 3-sheet. They used to make billboard-sized posters. Even in the 20s, they made those. It would be incredible if someone found a billboard-sized poster of Frankenstein or Dracula or the Bride of Frankenstein. Who knows, When I first started 30 years ago, no one knew that there was a Frankenstein 3-sheet out there or a Mummy 3-sheet. I mean, I found both. And so, it's...
Only known copies in the world.
Those two are the only known copies in the world. I don't know what's coming around the corner. It's just one of those unpredictable things. And that's also part of the appeal, I think, is that with movie posters, if you want to become a movie poster collector, there's two ways to do it. You go out online and you buy from dealers, or you hit the road, you go out there and you start hitting up movie theaters and antique stores and flea markets and just, anything,
the whole
everything.
Pawn Stars thing.
Yeah, and you can find stuff out there. I mean, there's still a lot of stuff, and I know more than a lot of people who are doing that, probably as we speak right now, they're probably driving to some place, somewhere, up in the eastern seaboard or something, because they heard of an old movie theater that's been boarded up for the last 20 years, but someone still has the key. That's how it all works.
In my small town, there was a movie theater that goes back to the 1940s, and the building still stands. It's been renovated into something else. But now that you start talking about, what's in the walls?
Yeah, I mean, you never know.
What was papered over?
Yeah, there could be gold in there.
Are there famous artists or
a lot of
who created these things?
Well, a lot of the artists that made the American movie posters are unknown or uncredited, but there's quite a few European artists that were known and credited. One of the most famous ones was this guy named Roland Codon, and he was a French artist, and he did a lot of the French movie posters from the 30s to the 50s, and he also did a lot of contemporary advertisements too. And he was a very, very famous artist. But probably, Toulouse-Lautrec did early movie posters in France, during the turn of the 20th century. I mean, and then in the 50s and 60s, famous artists started doing movie posters. I mean, Frank Frazetta, who's a famous illustration artist. He started doing movie posters in the early 60s, along with just a whole host of other illustrators who are, famous for other reasons these days.
So, what are you hoping that people get out of the what kind of joy are you hoping that people will derive from this?
Well, first and foremost, I hope that people will see these things and just will recognize the beauty of it and the grandeur of it, and just get blown away by seeing all this stuff in one spot. Because when you have all these really great pieces and they're all together, you get this synergy going, and for me it's a really cool energy, and it feels really good, and it's overwhelmingly just cool just to be surrounded by cool horror pieces if you're a fan. And then on the other hand, it's a great way to educate yourself about movie posters in general, and the art of the movie poster, and how it's contributed to culture over the decades, and the growth of it from the turn of last century till now.
Okay, last question. Regardless of value, your favorite piece?
It probably would be the Mummy 3 sheet. I love that image. It's on my guitar. When I look at it, I just get lost in the colors of it, the composition, just the lushness of it. I just love it. I get lost in this stuff. It's my mind just dives in totally. I'm just somewhere else. It's a amazing effect that this stuff has on me.
Everybody needs to have a hobby, and sometimes the hobby becomes something completely obsessive.
No, that's me.
If you're in the Toronto area, It's Alive, classic horror and sci-fi art from the Kirk Hammett collection, runs at the Royal Ontario Museum from July 12th, 2019 until January 5th, 2020. From there, it will move on to be shown at other museums around the world. Thanks to Kirk for the chat. Thanks to Metallica's people for smuggling us backstage in Nashville. And thanks for the ROM for making this interview possible. This has been an Ongoing History bonus podcast. Technical production by Chris Santos and Rob Johnston. I'm Alan Cross.
You've been listening to the Ongoing History of New Music podcast with Alan Cross. Subscribe to the podcast through iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and everywhere you find your favorite podcasts.